Recording is on.
Okay, so today is November 14th, 2021, and this is our Western Desiderata meeting. And I don't have any updates for the ARC, so I'll pass it on to the next person.
I don't have any update.
I was going to do the SVG symbol for the sigil, but I didn't make it. I'm busy doing pictures and stuff, so cartoons. So I haven't got around to that. No, apart from that, I don't really have anything. So I thought today we were going to talk about food. So Sophie, do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I put a few notes on under the meeting because I've been thinking about it quite a while because I'm hearing this attitude at the moment of facing the food shortages and all that, and I'm hearing the attitude of how people are stocking food into their house in case of calamity, and that sort of talk. And I was thinking this is a discourse that is that's not going to the root of our problem, because the way we feed ourselves, I mean, I'm not talking for myself probably, but I'm talking for most people, is part of the industrialized civilization we're living in. And I just wanted to see what people had to say on the public, on general, because I don't have. I mean, I've been into that for a long time. I've been interested in nutrition, and by my job, I've been delving into that. I grow my vegetables. I have a garden, and I have a position on food. But I've also like what Hugh is saying about the clock, and how that is ruling also everything, every aspect of our life, and to the point that people's life is actually organized around their meals. And I'm not denying the social importance of sharing a meal between people, and that is very important. I think this goes back to being a tribe, to being together, to share what keeps us alive, and joy, and everything. But the whole ideas of regularity, and yes, the clock, and also the quality of the food. So it's such a vast subject. I don't know really where to start, and that's why I jotted a few ideas on the under the in the comments on the sub. I really like the article that Bob put about the hunter-gatherer's diet, even though there's no point in dreaming, like, we're not going to do, we're not going to follow that. But I think there's a lot of matter of discussion in the subject, and it's a sensitive subject. So the fish brain is going to wake up, and what is it? Does anybody want to say something about this, or start on one aspect?
Sure. Just one aspect, combining what you were talking about with the clock as well as the hunter-gatherer diet, is one thing I noticed in Daniel Everett's work is that the Pitaha didn't have set meal times. They just ate randomly throughout the day, and they didn't eat together all the time. Like sometimes if someone caught a fish, they'd like share it out with their buddies. But it was like if 4 a.m. is a perfectly viable time to have a meal for them. Like they're just like whatever, whatever floats your boat. And it's interesting that we ascribe so much ritual and structure towards the family aspects and these kinds of things when that's not necessarily baked into human nature. Like that could just be a societal ritual, and maybe we should question some of the those rituals to figure out what are the consequences of them if they haven't been questioned.
I agree totally with you because I've got a lot of African friends, and every time I'm in their house, it's the same thing. You can find people suddenly going to cook fufu in the middle of the night, and children being hungry in the morning and having a full meal, and the mother not eating until she's ready to have a full. It's like that. There's absolutely no structure and no, as I said, I'm talking about from our cultural point of view. It's become a kind of a, and I think yes, it's derived from the clock. It's very interesting what you're saying, Ryan.
Yeah, another thing that was interesting about the Peter Hunt around food is that they would often do just multi-day fasts just to prove that just to undergo some eustress. Where they thought it was like a cool thing or a right action basically to not undergo like a limited calorie restriction just for not necessarily because there was no food, but because it's good practice for when there isn't any, and it also just makes you feel like a stronger person. And so to them, it was like a character building, like exercise activity.
Yeah, I agree 100% of what you say. The experience of hunger, knowing that, it's, and that's to answer the question that's in the comments there. What is the perceived problem? Preppers, because they hoard MRIs and dried food, and how does the perceived problem relate to deindustrialization? I think it's the mindset of the prepper that's the problem, because they're not questioning at all the situation where we're in this structure. And
Yeah,
everything should be changing your mindset, questioning everything, questioning the cultural aspects of feeding.
exactly. So I was reading Retro Future by John Michael Greer today, and the point was brought up that they had all these garden in a box kits in the prepper kits for a lot of his friends had, which had some seeds and some like a trowel maybe, and a book on how to do basic gardening. And it's just like and he said that it takes about 5 years to get competent as a gardener. And so a lot of these people, if they actually ended up in collapse and they start reading that book on year 1 of collapse, their life would be ended before that learning curve got taken up. So I think that it's we not to mention if things are collapsing due to climate, that you need to have a good set of skills to understand how to adapt to that as well. So doing gardening in multiple regions, different climates, because the climate that you're in may become a different climate at a later point, and you may need to have the experience of that to be able to modify your behavior.
That's why I like the idea of being on a boat. That's my prepping strategy is always, I never liked the idea that people had of putting all the eggs in one basket and thinking, they'll go and buy a plot of land and then go off grid or something. And I thought, like, one thing you can be sure of, things are going to change. So you want to be able to move, and it's not going to be predictable. So I also knew that the it takes a long time to get a garden going and to learn how to do it. And so these people are kidding themselves that even doing permaculture and stuff, they're not really self-sufficient as they think they are. But I always think if you're able to move, like on a boat, there are lots of opportunities to scavenge. So I've always thought you should think more about being a scavenger and survivor, have that survival attitude. And a boat's a good way to do it. I think for a lot of people, being a pirate would be a way better option. But you find things all the time. I mean, I've picked out a pineapple in the water, just a flicking pineapple floating by, and I thought, well, I'll just pick it up. Picked it up, it was perfect. I have no clue. It must have fallen out of a container or some shit. But stuff like that happens all the time at sea. So it seems to me that there's so much more opportunity on a boat than going out into Montana and staking out a piece of land.
Yes,
I've always put a very high price on mobility, and I've always written people off that get sedentary. I've always thought that they're not going to shake.
Well, I live near the sea, and I know what you mean. Constantly picking up stuff, and I know what you're talking about. But also, I would even go further than Ryan. It doesn't take 5 years. It takes much more to really understand that you can have a bad year, that you can to harvest your seeds if you grow from seeds, to understand your land, to it's I think it's much more that I'm personally been 30 years at it, and I'm always learning. Also, what I've been doing for the last few years is foraging, because I think also you want to know, and it makes you realize how the seasons are and how things change around you. Foraging gets you out of your garden, it gets you out in the wild. You can be doing it from a boat or from anywhere. You just everywhere there's a bit of land, there's always something, roots and leaves and berries that you can find, and it's a great thing to do. And it takes a long time to know your environment, to know the plants, to know and also to know what is perennial and what is fragile, what will change, what observing all the time around you, what's going to what is not doing well in the moments where we are now. I'm in a climate that's and in an ecosystem that's extremely good at the moment so far, but I can imagine that people living in arid places are going to have enormous problems if they are going to want to garden. And even permaculture, as you say, permaculture is it's a mindset. It's not just following guidelines from little books from it's just not taking too much from the land and putting back on the land your shit and your rubbish and everything. It's not just this kind of postcard idea that you see in the hippie groups in England. It's much more than that. It's a whole mindset. So yeah.
I think we can learn a lot from the San people and various other tribes that have been previously displaced who have retained a hunter-gatherer culture, because they were in the good places before, and then industrialization pushed them to reservations or to tracts of land that were arid and or not arable or one of these situations, and they've adapted. They figured out how to adjust to this kind of situation. So they're the professors that we should be taking university courses from, right? How do you deal with a massive upheaval of that kind and learning the environment in a new place that you don't have familiarity with and still surviving?
So what I figured out from coming from Africa is that, from what I know of those tribes and what I've seen of them, maybe Sophie can talk more about the Berbers and stuff, but you haven't got a hope. What convinced me that all these people are barking up the wrong tree is you only have to know a little bit of knowledge about those people to know that you haven't got a prayer. You're not going to emulate them. Some people have said to me, yeah, well, can I hook up with you and get a boat and we'll go and find some indigenous people? It's like indigenous people, know enough to put an arrow through your head if you came near them in a collapse situation. It's like they're not going to be sharing yams with you. You'll be a mortal threat to them. So, but they have secret tribal knowledge, and they have so much knowledge that it goes back generations. And so there's a couple of problems. One of them is they've lost it this generation. This last 20 years has been absolutely brutal to these tribal situations from all over the world. But as the NGOs and the United Nations and the IMF and all these people, and people like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all these foundations have been assisting these people, which means basically wrecking their culture just at the point before collapse. So the missionaries are doing it. It's basically everybody's interfering with these people. So this generation, this last generation, has been kidnapped by the industrial civilization. So there's so many reasons why you can't go that route. We can't go primitive. So again, I came back to the strategy of you've got to think more like a pirate or a scavenger. And I think more in terms of guerrilla gardening. You see, I sail from island to island, and one of my secret hobbies is to go and look at places, find wells, and find abandoned olive groves and fruit orchards. So I know I keep on coming across trees that are like full of fruit and stuff, and I go like, okay, take a mental note that tree isn't ever pruned, nobody claims it, and it's full of fruit. But I know vineyards and olive garden, and I've done some guerrilla gardening in abandoned villas during COVID and stuff. Not abandoned villas, but basically people have second homes and stuff on islands. So you have these millionaires with this huge home, a big pool, and they're all these ancient orchards and olive orchards and stuff that they don't know or care about. And so you can go and I've done experiments planting stuff, but obviously, I planted some, kind of beans and stuff. But obviously, you would go and plant stuff more down the line of, or what Sophie's saying, like tradable stuff. So in other words, that Derek Jensen podcast with that guy, that is straight down the line. So I know where people have their little stashes and gardens all the way up and down the Greek coast, all the way to Crete and the Aegean. So I know all these little, where guys have their little secret stash, where there's guys are doing guerrilla gardening all over the place. It's an amazing world, and I feel that you've got to think more in those kind of terms as catch as catch can. You've got to think more of being a refugee and making do, and not get on this thing like, oh, we can go and do a university course from the Sami and hook up with them. It's like, no, that's never going to happen. You're not going to be doing permaculture in Britain and stuff, because for one thing, I tried to say in my book, one thing that's very consistent throughout history is when food gets short, really short, the state seizes food. Food becomes a contraband. So you can't. All these idiots are sitting around thinking, "Oh, we're going to be okay. We've got potatoes, and we're going to be doing stuff in our little vegetable patch in Britain." No, you fucking aren't. They're going to seize all that stuff and take it to the cities because they need to keep the populations at bay. So rationing during World War II, you could get shot. You could get fucking shot for hoarding food. And they kind of airbrush all that shit out of history. But like, man alive, I'll be amazed if that doesn't come back in the next few decades. So, but Sophie, what do you think about that? We talk about the Berbers and about the kind of plants you should be thinking of in terms of medicinal, tradable plants.
It's not the Berbers I know, it's the Bedouins. The Berbers are in North Africa. The Bedouins I know better, and I've stayed with them, and I've seen how their lifestyle has been influenced. So, as you said, over the last generation, they've seen suddenly appearing shops. Near the desert, on the edge of where I was on the Red Sea, and the generation of my generation, the people I know there, what they've done is that they've decided to show the young people to bring them back to the wells in the desert, show them again where the water is. and they've always been semi-nomadic. They always had little walls with little places where there was a little bit of greenery in the desert, where they knew that they could have some things, whether it was beans, tomatoes, or because their diet is, they're the same as we are saying. They eat at any time, they sleep at any time, they just follow their body. But they have managed, the ones I was staying with, I've managed to get this little thing going again, and they're laughing at their other Arabs in the area. For example, the Saudis, that they call them degenerates, because I say, why? And they say, because they can't even cook bread in the desert. They don't know how to use the sun and put a bit of dough under the stones and bake it. They'll never survive. Those guys are degenerates, And so, yeah, I had a direct first-hand experience of the scavenging they do also, because you'd think there's nothing in the desert, but no, it's amazing what they can get in any little place. And it's a great school of thought. You're totally right. And as you said, the same thing happened to me during the lockdown. A lot of holiday homes were left, and I can tell you, I was really happy to be able to go and climb over the walls in the gardens, get loads of fruit and stuff to supplement my diet and my pantry. Yeah, it's a great way of doing things. Absolutely. I don't want to say too much online.
Yeah, I mean, I don't put much store on growing my own stuff or being able to. What I put a store on is other people, because people in these islands, the old people that still keep chickens and know all the herbs and stuff that you can eat by the roadside. All the onions here, they all have this knowledge still, and they're very generous. So the people keep on giving you fruit and veggies and stuff, and you're far better off knowing one of them. So it's kind of like who you know, not what you know, kind of deal. But I encourage people not to get into the mindset of what you know. I mean, it's better to know Bear Grylls and some survivalist than it is to take a survival course. So you must try and think about what your assets are. And it can be just as easy as being a nice bloke. I mean, the bar's not very high. But Sophie, tell us more about those type of plants, as much as you can, that you probably want to think of.
I've looked at what were the medieval plants that people could eat without them being seized by their masters, because every crop, even sometimes their vegetables, so I've looked into some old European, Northern European roots and greens that are perennial, and that you don't need to cultivate the ground first for it, and so it's not back-breaking, and it's easy to hide in nature. So they had several varieties. I've got about 6, 8 that I've started over the last 5, 6 years in the place where I am now. And they grow all year round, or they grow, the roots will come again and again, and you always got something. And what I've been doing lately is that I'm taking some of the young roots or the young plants, and I'm throwing some in other places that are not on my, I live on a little acre of land, so I'm lucky enough to have a bit of space, but it's mostly wild anyway. But I've put some on the side of the roads. I've put some near car parks in the town. I've put some, and I'm just leaving them there. And I just know that they're there. I'm leaving them on the road, and there's a lot of perennial. There's good King Henry, skirret, Jerusalem artichokes. I mean, to just name a few that you don't need to look after. Once they're in the ground, they go on, they grow. Just have to dig a bit. You don't even need tools. You could dig with your hands. So and for the greens, you know yourself. You can pick them, and you can try to get some varieties that are adapted to your climate. There's always perennials, but you have to study. You have to read a bit. You have to find out in history what was and don't get obsessed about I mean, this kind of measurement of the diet, what you have to have in your day, and because that is also nerve-wracking. It's completely destroying the way people eat. They're not enjoying what they have on their plate or in their hands anymore. They're just thinking in terms of protein, fats, sugar, vitamins, calories, and that is extremely toxic. I mean, it's toxic for the mind, and I think we know we need to reconnect with what we feel we need. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're craving for I don't know, a piece of meat, well, just go for it. I don't know, or a fish, and it's not this kind of mindset of the medical world who kind of gives people guidelines on what a diet should be. And the prepper, I'm sorry to come back to the preppers, but that's the guys I've been a bit shocked by, because they want to replicate in their bunkers the lifestyle that they're having now, which is toxic and completely ridiculous. So they're calculating their rations like the army, and they're giving, you have to have those, the army rations, how they are. You've got those dried biscuits and those soups that the things that they take in space. And that would last. How long would that last anyway? And it's just completely ridiculous. The mindset again. It's like what we're talking this morning about. This morning, it's all in there. It's all in there. Yeah, there's a lot of perennials. Every country. I mean, you don't need to export them. You just need to go back to history. But they're very difficult to find. Not everywhere, but it's some places. You have to dig, and you have to understand that there's wild varieties of everything you have in your garden. There's wild cabbage. On the shore, I have sea beet, sea kale that grows. You probably have it in Greece because they grow all along the sea.
Yeah,
And you've got your green as good as spinach. They're there. Of course, if you're not in front of a sewage or something, but other than that, you've got so many things on the shore. And don't forget the seaweed, because the
and
hunter-gatherers,
mushrooms.
yeah, and the shells and the
Mushrooms,
hunter-gatherers.
mushrooms are also quite good to get into.
But there's a season with mushrooms, so you're not, you're certain times of the year where you will find them, certain times where you won't have them. But the seaweed is an interesting avenue of studying too for people who are near the shore. There's of course the what was I gonna say? Can't remember. Of course, all the berries, but all that is seasonal. But there's so many things that we buy in the supermarkets that exist at a wild in a wild form, but they don't look the same. They don't look, they're not all shiny and big, and and they don't have the same shape sometimes, but they exist. They've just been genetically modified to suit the market and to suit the table of what people imagine is a meal. For example, bananas. The real banana, the original banana, was this size. That's what a banana was. And they were bred to become bigger and bigger and bigger and to have this perfect marketed form. But if you, I don't know, would you find some banana trees now that are, maybe there's some in some very wide places, probably in the rainforest and places like that. But nearly every type of food that we used to is a monster. It's a monster food.
But now that you brought up seaweed
It breaks my heart when I see those gold bananas.
Yeah, they're all clones. The seaweed that I put a link in. It's greenwave.org, which is an interesting food production technique, which has even the least amount of inputs. You just need some rope, really, and you go out to a patch of ocean, and you hang some bags full of bivalve clams and things like that, and some kelp off of the rope, and it creates a little tiny ecosystem where they are mutually beneficial to each other, and it takes very little inputs. You just put them out there, and then they just keep growing. And I think that might be something that we could do. There's this guerrilla gardening thing, but maybe there's a way to do guerrilla gardening on the ocean with boats. where you could find little
Yeah,
places that aren't well traveled.
Yeah, I did this. I did this during lockdown on the island that I was on. I came from the marina that I was wintering in. They have a lot of mussel farms in the bay next to it. So my hull got filled with mussels, got totally contaminated by mussels. So when I got to this island, I scraped them all off, and they came off in kind of nets, kind of bunched together. So I put them on rocks and got them started in mussel beds. And then I thought, wait a year, these will be great. They're just a bit undersized. But some blasted Italian kids, I saw them jumping over the rocks, and they were like, hey, come on. And they cleaned them out to the tiniest last one. And they're like, Jesus, you should have just waited a bit. But yeah, they took my mussel bit. So the thing is that you mustn't underestimate all the commercial things, because the commercial fishing farms, they're a bust, right? They need big subsidies, and they're not going to last. So they're very likely to be abandoned. So all over the Med and the Atlantic, all around Europe, and so also North America, Alaska, they have mussel farms. So they have big rafts, and they do what you were saying, Ryan. They hang ropes and then put a sock over these things, and you can have all this shellfish and kelp and stuff like that. But they're doing it already. And here's the secret. You can just raid them. So humans think in terms more about just being a raider. So you have to look what you're doing, because they put cameras and stuff more and more. But I don't think these these fish farms, they need a lot of commercial fishing and nursing all the time. They need these tenders going out. They're full of fish food that comes from Peru. And as soon as the subsidies end, which will happen in a fiscal crisis, those things are going to be abandoned. Occasionally you do find bays with all that stuff abandoned. But the mindset I'm encouraging you to think of more as being a pirate. There are a lot of opportunity for scavenging piracy, because you see, these things are going to go. You're going to have to imagine all these things becoming available as they go down. So there's a lot of infrastructure that not Mad Max, where you go and rebuild, or Waterworld, where you build your floating and it's all corrugated iron, and then you recreate civilization again. No. Basically, you think more like an African does today. There are millions of people all over the world that are scavenging around all these places around the world. And you have to think in terms of, if your survival really gets down to that, then you want to be mobile and have that mindset. There'll be lots and lots of things left over in the dregs of the civilization. So there are lots of abandoned buildings, abandoned boats, abandoned farms, where people will get into real trouble in a collapse is in the existing commercial farming areas. So that they are deserts without these, ammonia fertilizer, the Haber-Bosch method, without the grid. Most of the Midwest of America, all the farming in Spain and Europe, all of those places, they're actually food deserts as soon as the oil stops and infrastructure stops. And nobody's going to be walking into an Idaho field or some place in Arkansas and reaping corn that's in an abandoned field, because that corn is inedible. It's been made to process, been genetically engineered to be inedible, not on purpose, but by accident, because they've perfected it for the factory system. So if the factory system goes down, all those things that process corn in America into the 150 different constituents that they then repackage as manufactured food, those things you won't be able to do without a plant, and those plants all go away with the grid. So it's amazing how much we've stacked our dependence on oil in the grid, and both those things, I think, are destined to go away. So I just want to paint that as a mindset to think about. But yeah, I did think about, I tried to get my nephew to start this making floating rafts out of driftwood and stuff. I thought of doing it as a project, a seasteading project, and then kind of rolling glass houses out of plastic bottles. And you see, I thought of this idea of sailors' gardens, because sailors are technically adept, and they, the idea would be, you plant something, take something, and then you have it all around on the internet where people could go and find it. You would have desalinators or water makers and put them all over the place. And so I thought sailors would maintain them. You could make a community of doing that. It's something I've always wanted to do.
Well, I think speaking to the mindset, when you said we can be more like pirates, piracy kind of implies a systemic like ownership model of property, where whereas it wasn't that long ago that the commons were not enclosed, right? So all of the things that you're speaking of, Sophie, and like that was all what everybody did all the time, right? Where it's land, it's common land that everybody can use for that purpose. And in collapse, there's the initial collapse where the states are still powerful, and there's going to be you have food, you have a gun pointed at you, like that situation. But then there's after that, all the starvation and things wipe out most of the people, you get the commons back. I think over time you may actually get the commons back.
No, you don't. You see, this happened in Africa. So a lot of the places that in Africa that became too difficult politically difficult to farm. It used to, like Zambia used to be the breadbasket in Africa. They're not actually farmable. You don't get the commons back because they've wrecked the commercial agriculture has absolutely wrecked the soil, and it'll take you 40 years for that soil to come back. You just haven't got the time or the patience. You'd have to eat dirt for 40 years to get that soil back. It's actually eroded. There's no topsoil in America's farms. So they're actually inarable. It is a big desert. It's just a big tabletop where all this agri business is keeping the food grown in virtually a sterile, infertile environment. So nobody's getting the commons back. You have to imagine, Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and these things will be dust bowls, and they'll be too dry. You won't have any water. The commons is not coming back. Any place with a river and a delta and stuff like that is that's going to be contested. And all the vast areas that you would expect that are farmland today would be abandoned. That's what happened in Africa, and they don't even go back to being wild. It didn't even go back to being African savanna because it was wrecked. Yeah, well, you see, once all the food and the agricultural layer on the top goes away, it wrecks the water table. It wrecks everything. The rivers become wadis. They flood in the rains, and then they dry most of the year. It's a very bleak landscape after collapse. But the thing is that it means that the masses are in terrible trouble. But anybody that's mobile or on a boat or something like that can switch their locales, and you will find that people will say, "Hey, these guys are living high on the hog. You can go to some Caribbean island, and these guys are completely untouched. They're having a great old time, while the rest of the world is, has the violins out and all lamenting the end of collapse."
Well,
So
you're
it's finding pockets.
You're getting it a bit out of my mind and my mouth. What you're saying about the land being wrecked by agriculture, and I always explored when I was learning my life as a gatherer and a gardener, to live and to study areas that were arid, hard, deserts, places where agriculture is not profitable, like the area where I live, where it's full of rocks, where I had to take out stones with my own hand out of the earth so that I could get a few roots in there, because those places are not popular for the industry. So in those places, the soil and the land is safe, but there are not many of them. But there are some. There are, if you just have to keep away from what is called fertile places, fertile that are now unfertile because they only rely on fertilizers to be fertile. But there is arid places, hard places, uh, deserts. Yeah, even the sea could be considered like a harsh environment if you think of the weather and everything. That is very important because it's possible to replicate the commons, but it won't happen on a big scale. That's the problem. It will be possible in small areas and maybe extreme Nordic places too. I saw it in deserts, so I mean it's possible. Even if the climate gets to the point where everything is burning, there is possibility of survival for a handful of people who are strong and helping each other. And that there's there's possibilities. But yeah, and the big dream of the commons after collapse, that will take years. I mean, it's years to get the soil back
Hundreds of years, centuries. Yeah,
especially in the
centuries and
States,
centuries.
England, and some parts of Spain and France. But think of the mountains. Think
Yeah.
of
So what I saw,
hmm,
what I saw in Africa was after things collapsed and they tried to return farmland, agricultural land back to the wild. It's a 50-year project or more, and part of the reason is there are no animals. The ecosystem requires animals, and we've wiped out the insects and birds and all the ungulates. So even when they look at things like Pleistocene Park in the tundra, that's in effect a geoengineering project, but they're trying to return the taiga back to how it was in the Pleistocene era with horses and maybe even mammoths and stuff. But it's going at the fastest rate possible to geoengineering to make it actually it's carbon negative. It actually, if they can restore that taiga, it actually absorbs carbon. But it'll take decades and decades to just recover square kilometers. So it's not a solution to climate change or a solution to anything, and mainly because the animals don't multiply at an exponential rate, because they still have to, the horses have to find lichen under the snow, and basically it's a long period of recovery of it's what we've done to the planet is so devastating, and it's a long period of healing that needs to happen. And you have to imagine that healing has to happen with climate instability. So when you see these maps of all this shit about, oh yeah, everybody can move north, it's absolute crap, because there's no soil up there. There's no soil when you move north. Nobody's going to be moving into Siberia as things get warm, because it's that soil is barren, and it turns to permafrost as soon as it loses top cover. So all these people are, you cannot do this massive change and get anything beneficial. So what you can bet is there will be small pockets, because there's so much variation in the world. But you have to imagine you've got to go find those things, and then you might find people on them. So not only do you have to find them, but then you have to find ones that you can actually exploit. So you have to think more in terms of being a grifter and drifting around. You really want to be one of the sea peoples. If you look at the last collapse in like 1174, that's when everything collapsed. All civilizations, the Egyptians hang on by their fingernails, maybe the Sumerians a little bit. But most of the major cultures around in fact, all of them around the Mediterranean collapsed. The Phoenicians, Minoans, all of them went. And the guys that made out like bandits were bandits. They were the sea peoples. So you have to think in terms of being more like a raider and a mover and shaker. But this idea of becoming a hippie and growing your own shit is like, oh man, that you're going to be taking phenobarbital with the Ken Bendel with the Bendels of this world if you go down that route. This is not a lentil soup thing. This is eat rats thing.
Yeah. What about the Mongolian strategy, like the being mobile with a horse and living in tundra grasslands, that area? Because I feel like that was sustainable because if there are grasses left somewhere, then animals and that symbiosis could continue.
Yeah, the grasses are a good bet, but if you're in like northern Russia or in South America around Cape Horn and what do you call that down there?
Patagonia.
Patagonia. Yeah, if you're in places like those and you've got a couple of yaks or something, and you know how to milk a yak, yeah. But you see those guys there again, they have to be pretty knowledgeable, right? So you at least have to know how to skin things, and you have to know how to trap, and you have to know how to survive the winter. So you need fuel.
A lot of people don't realize the climate of Mongolia. I mean, it takes generations to get you to understand the place. I've read a lot of travel blogs of travel people from Mongolia and historical. It's a totally, first it's an enormous area, and it's got a very freaky climate, which is not going to get better. Plus, it's extremely polluted at the moment. So yeah, even some of the nomads there have find it hard to continue their lifestyle. They're under the pressure of both sides, Russian and China. So it's what I was saying earlier. Still, difficult places are a good place to look, I think, to study. But I just wanted to return to what Ryan said earlier about the mindset that's behind all this, because we're all talking about this like affluent white. Westerners, and we're trying to see how we maintain our little, diets and life. But again, I think we need to go back into how we feed ourselves and how the absurdities that are backing our food intake, our meals, our diets, and everything. That's the best prepping. Whatever, because as Ryan was saying about the people who are the piraha who eat whenever they feel like, and when they're hungry, when they have a good catch, or when they come back from the jungle with a nice basket full of nice fruit. But it's the same with us. I think we should be happy to get a bounty now and again and be able to go without something for a while. And it's a training thing. We're going to have to get out of this breakfast, lunch, and dinner, restaurants, and it's so ingrained. But it's only a few hundred years we've been brainwashed to eat like this, and it's just to mimic the rulers, really. Because honestly, we don't need to live like that. You're much better, you're much healthier when you get hungry now and again.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth remembering that 70% of the world's food production is done by peasant farmers even today. So it's only 30% that's agribusiness that's done with oil. That 30% is, feeds all the city dwellers. But those guys are, I mean, I just cannot believe the COP when everybody keeps on talking about, the global south and how climate change is going to be rough on those guys. It's like, no, it fucking isn't. Is of the 7.8 billion people on this planet, probably 4 billion of them spend their time collecting cow poop to use as fuel. And everybody's, oh, they're going to suffer. No, they're not going to fucking suffer. If you live in a bedsit somewhere down in Battersea, it's like, what the fuck are you going to do for fuel when Britain freezes? There are no cow chips around your neck of the woods, so stop lamenting about all these brown people. These brown people know how to collect cow poop and dry it and use it as fuel, because that's what they've all been doing since the 10,000 years. So all these people that imagine that the oil industry is going to be still pumping oil and all the ships are going to be shipping oil to them and they're still going to have kerosene heaters and Britain's going to be insulated. It's like, no, you're going to have to get used to whatever you can, your bronchitis can stand with a couple of skins hauled over your head. But yeah, if you live in the north of Europe or anything and you think you're going to, oh, you live on wind farms and shit with through the winter. You need fuel to get through the fucking winter in Europe. There is none. You can't burn grass. There's no biofuel, and they're not going to be shipping things to you when there's a fucking war on. So, like, get real. These fucking guys in the Sahara and that, they're going to be fucking laughing at us because they've got cows, they've got cow poops, and they burn it for fuel. It's what the fuck are you going to do for fuel when the grid goes down? That's what you got to ask yourself. And it's like, it's so fragile. It's going. So I mean, I hope I'm getting the point across here that our ideas are so upside down. They're unbelievable. It just hints at the panic and suffering that's going to come to white people in urban areas.
That's why the Bedouins were telling me that about the Saudis, because they were laughing their heads off because they can see the future for them. Because we were sitting with the tribe I was with on the side of the Red Sea, looking across to Saudi, looking at all the lights, and we were around a fire, and they were saying, think of these guys when their air conditioning is going to go down and their electricity is going to go. They're all going to die. And we're brothers, but now they're finished because they can't survive. They're finished. Some of them still know how to ride a horse or a camel and maybe fly a falcon, but just for fun. But they don't know how to find food in the desert. They don't know anymore how to bake, how to cook, how to. Even they said the women, they would never, because they're very, when they choose a wife, she has to know how to survive in the desert. They're not going to take a little city girl who go to the shops. They want a woman who knows how to build a tent and travel, or grow a few things if they have a semi-nomadic camp. But they don't want one of those pretty looking Saudis that are, so they are laughing, and they do this about the Saudis. They do this sign that say, guys, they're mad.
The alien cortex. They're pointing to the alien cortex. The alien cortex. They're pointing
and
to.
They are definitely pirates.
What? It is all the alien cortex. The alien cortex is the thing that's going to get it. So you got to ask yourself, how close to the alien, do you need the alien cortex to survive? If you do, you're in trouble. It's like if the grid stops, water's not going to come out of your faucet. So in those situations, the sewage is not going to work. There's going to be cholera epidemics. So ask yourself, you only have beer on the shelf at Sainsbury's and Vons and Albertsons because you're rich. People bring all of this stuff to market because you have money. But after a fiscal collapse, you're not going to have any money. You're going to have nothing. What are you going to trade for fresh water, for beer and food and stuff? If you live in Britain, it's like, oh, I'll sell you my shit in the metaverse. It's like, no, people that actually have real shit don't want your crap. They don't want your iPhone or your skills as a software programmer. They don't want your bloody driving skills or your welding skills or your skills as a lawyer or doctor, maybe, but not without knowing something about outside of the medical system, the industrial medical system. But all our industrial conceits will go away with the grid. And so it's like, I can't see how the grid stays up. So ask yourself, where do you get the fuel to get through the winter? Where do you get the fresh water? It's like, think about it. Next time you go for a walk in the park, go and have a look around. Say, can I drink from this river? Would I be able to tear branches of this to get through winter? You know how much fucking wood you need to get through winter in a cold country? It's a shocking amount. You need your whole garage full of wood just to get, and look at all your neighbors all stretched down the street. Every one of them needs a garage full of wood. So can you see the suffering and shit that's around the corner? It beggars belief. And everybody's worried about the brown people. It's like, fuck, give me the brown people any day.
Yeah, but
they're going to be laughing.
It's again the alien cortex that's also dictating the way we feed, I think, too. this kind of a denial of the messages of the body, and the denial of that's coming from deep layers where we know the nutrients we need. Deep down, we know, children know. You know, it's just completely perverted from birth, and that's what I wrote in the comments. They start in, well, maybe not now, but when I was a medical student in some maternities where I was, they were telling the mothers to feed their babies, to breastfeed their babies by the clock, and that there had to be intervals between the feeding. And even if the baby was crying its head off, said, no, it'll have to wait for 3 hours now. It's not time. And you had all this is built in from a very young age, and people who have grown up in our generation and maybe the generation after have been subjected to this at a very deep level. And now on top of that, you add the breakfast, you add the lunch, because it works for the society, because people have their break when they work and all that. And you're starving sometimes at around 11 o'clock, you know what I mean? But you can't, because you have to wait for your lunch to, you know, it's all this is constructs that we have that are stopping us from feeling. And I mean, the best prepping is first to connect again with your body. it's you can make all the plans you want in permaculture, moving to a nice area, etc. If you're still tied up by the clock, you're fucked.
Yeah, I think we need to de-domesticate a bit, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about around food was a lot of the different foods that are staples of society and agriculture and such are, you know, dairy and grains, and those both create opioids in your brain. Like, they are addictive, and they are, you know, so it's essentially, you know, with this grain core of you know, we against the grain stuff, like there's a real sense of us being domesticated in terms of having an addictive personality around the foods that we are fed, the slavery foods, effectively just for slavery, because they create a dependence. Like, I've tried to get rid of wheat or food that because I have acid reflux whenever I eat it, and I like, it's so hard because I'm so addicted to it. Like, it doesn't make me feel good. It's literally like what you were saying of, you know, at many episodes ago about how horrible Coca-Cola actually tastes, but you're just addicted to it. You're it's and ice cream and milk is like, it's so weird that we eat that, and yet you know, it creates this you know, artificial high. The chemicals that are like schedule 1 or whatever, you know, chemicals that are really illegal are naturally generated by your body in the presence of these industrialized foods.
I got a suggestion. If you know, something I wanted to do as part of an org, the kind of thing that I wanted to do as part of an org, and I think maybe put this out there and people can think about it, but I kind of like the idea of having a prepping in place kind of exercise. So you have, I don't know what you would call it, a kind of an event, or a kind of series of events, and it's just for mainly psyops and psychological, but you kind of imagine a cult or a group like XR doing it, and you kind of like an ice bucket challenge where you do really kind of collapse awareness in place. So you do stuff like, you know, switch off your refrigerator and for a week, and then, you know, go hungry for 3 days, and say, you know, in the middle of winter, switch off all the fuel sources and keep warm without using any fuel. And saying, like, you know, all of these things are coming, so you might as well, you know, experience them, and then start thinking about them. Start thinking, what would you do? You know, say like, okay, the elevator doesn't work anymore, and there's no water coming out of the faucet. And you say, that's this week's game. And so everybody plays the game. You put in videos, what you did, all your experiences, all that kind of thing. But I like the idea of doing it in a game form where people are actually exposed to this kind of thing and start to see. Now, I knew that I was addicted to grains until I tried to stop, kind of things. So, then another week you have something like find a wild vegetable and live on it for 3 days. All that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
just
think that's great.
challenges.
It's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. And to add to what Ryan was saying about milk and grains, the mindset is not just this. You see, you don't want to go into this mindset and say, I have to have a diet without these things. What you have to think is, if something is available, I'll take it because it will feed me. And I'm just going to just eat what comes along. I seen again back to the Bedouins. Sometimes if a camel had a little one, they would be happy to go and share milk of camel, a glass of camel milk around just because it was at the good time. It was very nutritious. Oh, we're going to take some camel milk because it's good, and that's it. And you could be then weeks without it, but it's bounties. They come. Oh yeah, got this. You know it's there, and it's the same mindset with the prepping exercise. If you come across something, you're going to be happy to have it, especially if you're doing a hungry thing for a few days. Well, I don't think you need to think. Yeah, what somebody wrote, opportunistic diet. It's just that's an excellent exercise because you come across stuff.
I think that's where we get to the alien cortex way of looking at diet. So when what you were talking about with the regimented clock, having the diet by the clock, but also the proportions of how much protein you're supposed to have, how much carbs you're supposed to have, that's completely a linearized model of human diet, which is like every day is a cookie cutter, the same as the last day. And that is not how the ecosystem inside you should function, right? You should have, a lot of ebbs and flows of different proportions of things over time, right? It's not always. It's better to be unstable than to be a linear model that the system can put in a spreadsheet, right? Ignore the food pyramid.
Our reward system is designed to be random. So, like Skinner pigeon experiments, they couldn't get, if they too regular, the pigeons and stuff lose interest. And so they have to have a random reward. And they know that in gambling as well. Gambling casinos and stuff they've got to put randomize some of the reward in animal training, otherwise the animal lose interest. And I know from my own experience, just from what you were saying, Sophie, that from when I was a kid, we didn't have all the things that my kids take for granted now, and so that nothing's special anymore. If you have a chocolate or a cake or something, ice cream, that was a freaking once in a blue moon event that was, just the appreciation and the taste of it. I can remember back in the days when when having a chocolate or something would be a mind-blowing experience. It'd be awesome. And now the very same chocolate, it's like it does meh. And the reason is because I can go get one whenever I want. I can just go to the store and get one. So when I was a kid, that wasn't really available to us. And so we appreciated it much more. The reward is worth a million times. So it's kind of like we've kind of lost ice cream. We've lost those kind of rewards. If you said to a kid in my day, and we're talking, the 18th century, you said, hey, kid, would you like an ice cream? Well, I would have sold my grandmother for an ice cream. Now kids don't give a shit. If ice cream, whatevs. It's like everything's bland now. Nothing's special. Nobody knows what hunger really is. A hunger for depravity.
You said that we've lost ice cream. That's literally true in another sense. The Breyer's ice cream that I used to get from the U.S. Used to be like the only natural ingredients. It was really, really good and special, and they changed it. So you only now it's just a bunch of gums and like chemical things that make it cheaper and more in bulk, and it's not the same. And so yeah, my it's impossible for me to buy ice cream that is ice cream. Like I can't get it. I have to make
I'm
it.
convinced they got away with that. I'm convinced they got away with that, and also it's non-dairy. The ice cream's non-dairy substitute. It's made from like margarine fat or soy fat, or whatever. But I'm convinced they got away with that because nobody's tasting it. You know, in my day, I kind of feel, my gut feel is that if you pulled a dirty trick like that with something like ice cream, there would be riots in the streets because people, it's sacred. But now because now everything is meh, then they can get away with, it's like Coke. Coke used to, before high fructose corn syrup, used to taste much better than it does now. If you get a Coke from like Mexico, it's still made with corn sugar, and then not corn sugar. I mean, it's still made with cane sugar, and it tastes like, I remember as a kid, it tastes way better than high fructose corn syrup stuff. But they can always substitute cheaper E numbers and manufactured products because people are not really tasting it. It's not really a religious experience anymore. Well, there's some data. Yeah.
I
Well,
think of what I've been trying to conceptualize food as is a slavery food. Like I look at certain foods as being inherently for slavery in a way. Like the those like watered down things that are, well, not watered down, but the things that they feed the children in schools, in public schools, for example, are like it's essentially like it's not much different than like your factory farming feed that they're feeding the cattle, right? It's and I think that you go back to the hunter gatherer stuff with the James C. Scott, and you got all the healthy bones and tall people and like no anemia. You go to the cities and it's like completely domesticated, short, terrible lifespans and all that under slavery. And I think it's just that we are essentially that whole formula hasn't changed, because if you're an American, you essentially only eat corn derivatives, like just like you would only eat wheat or sorghum or whatever the that city their main crops were. So there's no diversity in the diet, and that anything where there's no diversity in the diet and it's centralized around that grain core is a slavery diet.
yeah, I must tell you, when I was a kid, I had this epiphany because I was like a teenager and we were driving into Johannesburg, which was the biggest, most modern city in Africa, I think, at the time. Now, I think Lagos is now. But while I was kind of looking out the window at the like Johannesburg skyline, and there was this huge skyscraper being built, and there was like one crane, so a bit of electricity going into it, but the vast majority of this huge concrete and glass tower going up was all these Africans working on it, and like ants, just climb, carrying things up, and essentially, and I was thinking about it, thinking, the whole Johannesburg skyline has been created by manual labor, by Africans. And I thought, it's all done on maize meal. What they kind of ran on was maize meal. So in other words, it's starch. What they feed slaves is starch, because starch is the cheapest energy formula you can get. So it's the cheapest form of human energy you can get, and that's why they feed it to slaves. So I that epiphany kind of bowled me over, because I suddenly saw this entire city is built on starch that has been burnt in human muscle, and or all the it's an incredible thought. Once I had that epiphany, you could see it everywhere. You can see in ancient Egypt, went and saw the pyramids. They're all doing the same thing. They in Mesoamerica, they building pyramids there, or everybody that uses labor to build these ziggurats and modern society is using the cheapest form of human energy, which is starch. It's just a cheap sugar to run a slave on. And when you have that epiphany, you'll never look at food the same way. I mean, there's nothing will make you a food snob quicker. But it's the, like we feed crap to animals and capos, we feed crap to humans because they just fodder for the industrial civilization. That we are just slaves. And if you don't believe you're a slave, it's like, look at your fucking food. It's corn. It's slave food.
But that's why I'm so mad at the medical world about their lies when people come to used to come to me actually with problems, with questions about nutrition in general and what was good for them and stuff, because they are giving this standardized type of diet to people to keep them in the slave thing. They're not looking at the individual. Number one, they're not questioning the source and everything. They come out with these sort of sheets that they give to patients, and they, here's a low-fat diet, here's a low-sugar diet. It's disgusting, and it's built on lies anyway, because we all know that there's been very big interests in the 50s and the 60s that were behind the low-fat industry to try to push low-fat food on people when it was completely ridiculous, and the same with the cereal industry, who tried to push their products, and when they knew that it was going to create an epidemic of obesity. And it's still going on. I mean, I'm only 2 years and a half out of work, and I was still seeing in surgeries these lies everywhere. And you're just having a whole group of accomplices, the industry, the medical world, the media, everything, that are contributing to this malnourishment and this way of feeding that is making us not only dependent on the civilization we're in, but also leading us to catastrophe when this is going to stop, when there's going to be collapse. And if people are not prepared to question that, they are going to be in for enormous suffering.
Yeah.
Well, what you're talking about is luxury. In America, what Ryan will explain to you is that they're still peddling the USDA food pyramid. And the fact that it's a pyramid is a joke in itself. If you talk about slaves and pyramid building, Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes, this is what civilization is. But that if you look at the history of the USDA food pyramid, which they still sell to the kids at school now, is it was nothing to do with nutrition or health or what was good for you or anything. It was to do with the American producers. So it reflected America's surpluses. So America had a grain and corn surplus. So they put all of that at the bottom of the pyramid, said, oh, you must eat lots of bread and you must eat, and it's like, it was terrible diet. But
Yeah.
it fitted the industrial requirements during the Cold War. It had nothing to do with nutrition or health. But they said, and doctors are still say, well, you must eat off the food pyramid because that's healthy. No, it fucking isn't. It's fucking inverted, if anything.
Yeah. And what was it? Nixon, who got the Supreme Court to declare ketchup was a vegetable, to make sure that was, they were getting enough vegetables for the kids.
Reagan.
Reagan, yeah, that's right.
But
Yeah, Reagan.
the lie of the 5
But that
food
had
a
to do
day.
with Heinz, you know. Heinz,
You know, I
Heinz
don't
was
know if you have that
yeah.
in America, but in Europe, they're telling people everywhere, oh, you have to eat 5 fruit a day, which is, I mean, completely absurd, number one. And if you look at the research, it's not fruit, it's fruit and vegetables first. And anyway, that is because they want people to continue to buy fruit all year when there is obviously a gap in winter where we don't have our local fruit, and so the exports of fruit are coming. People are using enormous amount of sugars without knowing, in those giant bananas that I was describing earlier. I mean, it's lies, lies, lies. Now the food pyramid has been a little bit altered in Europe, but not much. They're still going by the lies of the carbs and all that. It's still well sold. Now it's sold under the guise of fibers, you know, or stuff like that. Ah, don't believe them. Don't believe them.
And yeah, the other thing is it's the other thing they hide from people is it's heavily dependent on your genetics. So they pretend that, you know, things like milk and casein and all of these kinds of things are, you know, cause diabetes and do this and do that, and you know, this is healthy and that isn't, and it's like it's heavily dependent on your genetic ancestry. So what it, you know, the big difference is in not so much in race and skin tone and stuff, it's in how your digestive system and what you can actually eat. But they completely hide that. They pretend we're all the same, and it's like completely racist to talk about different foods for different ancestries. And so that's a completely taboo subject that nobody will touch. And so even the medical industry just sweeps it under the carpet and says, well, you know, you can't eat eggs or something because, you know, it's terribly bad for you. And they don't say, well, yeah, it's just the same Mexicans that are skewing the thing for everybody else. They just say, oh, well, let's keep quiet about that and tell everybody it's bad for them. So they hide all of these things under they push all of these things under the rug. But even within your race, it's very different for your family. Some families can eat complete things would kill others.
They hide them, but it also has a terrible impact, because I have a tiny, short little story. Bear with me for maybe a few minutes. But when I was a medical student, I was studying obstetrics and gynecology when I was in France. So I was in maternities a lot, and we had an influx of refugees coming from Mali. So I was in contact with a lot of women in the labor ward who were having babies. And there is a taboo in Mali that if a woman has a C-section, she can be repudiated. The husband can throw her away. So, and we were starting to have those kind of people who were coming during the labor ward around them to make sure that the delivery was going fine, with funny bells and funny African things, which were allowed in the hospital I was working, to prevent that from happening. But we started to notice over the recent years, the women who were in France for 2 or 3 years were starting to have a higher rate of C-sections. So we looked a little bit in research, and we started to see that the birth rate, the birth weight of those children was high, very high, for compared to the children that they'd had in Mali. And that was because they were starting to eat shit food, grain that were, you know, too much proteins, everything in France. So in their countries, those very slim, tall women would have their babies no problem. Arrived in Europe, C-sections. So we had the problem of C-sections, the problem of women repudiated, you know, and then weight gain, and children were starting to show, which is just, you know, it was just in front of my eyes. For me, that was a big revelation. I learned so much from that. It's just, yeah.
But that's also another kind of reason why there's so many taboo subjects on this. You can quickly get into taboo subjects, but this is also a reason why we're talking this morning about why you don't want to control the weather. You don't want to really be able to control your food source as well. It's the same as the weather, because people have, I mean, now I'm going to sound like a Nazi, but people have grown up in areas, so, you know, like the Maasai and people like that, they've grown up long enough where they, you know, cut the arteries of cattle and, you know, take the blood and mix it with milk and stuff, and that is too rich for European, but they actually adapted to it. So the same with San people. San people can eat their fill, they can spend hours and hours in eating until they're absolutely bloated, and then they can go without eating for weeks. You will not pull that off. They genetically adapted to the environment they live in, which is no surprise for other animals. But if you say that in our culture, people's hair gets on fire, and they start screaming, running around, saying you're a freaking Nazi. But the truth is, like, from like South America into the Andes, they've adapted. So the guys, their heart and their blood and is completely different. The guys in West Africa have sickle cell anemia, so they can survive mosquitoes and malaria. And then everybody, you go up into Mongolia and stuff, those guys can survive the regime there because they've got a lot of adaptation to it. But now we all like spread all over the world, and we're all supposed to have this one size fits all, Western diet. But maybe in America it's a bit different. Maybe ethnic foods are a bit more different. So Mexicans, black people, white people, Asians, they do drink, have different food. But increasingly there's this idea that food's food, everybody's the same, and it's a complete lie. There's they're shoving it all under the carpet.
Plus, there's the
Or
seasonal,
the reality.
and there's the seasonal feeding in Northern Europe, where we're from. People used to eat differently when they were working outside in the summer, and when they were more or less hibernating in the winter, living on soups and gruel that would, nobody thinks of questioning the idea that you should eat differently depending on what you do, and depending on how much time you spend up and the daylight. And so even if we're probably genetically adjusted to a diet that would be probably more close to the 17th, 16th century. And if you look back in the treaties and the book, there was periods where people did gigantic feasts, where they filled themselves up a bit like the Sun people, because they had a bounty of food suddenly at Christmas or whatever it was, and they would go for days. Fasting was very common in those years among the rich and the poor, for necessity sometimes, but sometimes just because as a way of living. It was not a problem. Fasting was part of life. The European genetic making hasn't changed that much since that time. And that's the result is the amount of enormous people and heart disease and arthritis and all the inflammatory diseases that we have now, because they are nearly all of them are related to the way we eat. We are not meant to eat like this. Our genetic making is not at all adapted to the diet we have in the West, in spite of what the medical world is telling you. They are wrong.
I don't remember
Yeah,
where I heard this, but
it's like
the fasting part and the feasting is it's actually if you go back to the times, that's kind of wise as a population stabilization technique to create a sustainable society. So if you have a bumper crop in years, right, and then you increase the population accordingly, then you create a huge amount of death and a lot of people die later, right? So doing sacrifices to the gods and doing feasts and these kinds of things, wasting food, and not just exponentially trying to grow your population, all this economic growth and population growth, right? Wasting food on purpose in good times can help be wise, even though that seems crazy, right? And I think that's another thing that we've left behind. Some of the religious things and things like that had built in some sustainability kind of heuristics that were just ritualized, but that we don't really we look at that as from the atheistic point of view and say, oh, that's irrational, like that's stupid. Why would you sacrifice to a god that doesn't exist, right? But there are side effects of that which can help you long-term survive.
Yeah, the regular meals were a big thing that drove civilization, because you know, I mean, even in medieval times, it was the clerics were all feasting and fasting, and so, you know, food was intermittent. Food is everywhere in the world, is maybe even in the tropics, maybe, but maybe the tropics is the most consistent. But in all over the world, the food is generally intermittent, and so we are adapted to going for periods of fasting and feasting, just because that's how the food appeared. So it's cost us a lot to try and get this regular synchronous supply of food, but it's one of our goals. I mean, it's one of the United Nations and UNESCO's goals is regular food and stuff like that. It's like craziness. But yeah. So we covered quite a bit of stuff on food. I'm pleased that we actually got to all of these things, because that's one of my things is yeah, one of my pet things is how food has been weaponized. So like Frederick Douglass, who was a freed slave, who wrote about slavery, wrote, it really resonated with me, the stuff he wrote, because we did it all in practice, I'm sorry to say. We you know, as a white well, at least child of a slave owner, you know, in effect, without admitting it, we didn't admit we were slave owners, white people, colonialists in Africa, but we were, in point of fact. And the stuff that Frederick Douglass wrote amazed me, because we did exactly the same things with Africans. And now you might say, oh, well, it's like a footnote in history, or just some kind of mea culpa for me personally. But I can see it done in our Western society as well, as they use these techniques on us that we use. So, for example, one of the things Frederick Douglass said is exactly the thing we did. Is you know, we would want to have a nice Christmas without having fear that the natives rise up and get you in the night, because especially if they don't have such a good Christmas and they're kind of envious of you. And so the thing was, we used to give after we had all our celebrations and that, we would make sure that the servants and stuff would have alcohol and would be able to celebrate that. And it was so we to give ourselves an easier ride. But Frederick Douglass said that on plantations they would he got into trouble because they would give the slaves lots of alcohol because they wanted to put them out so that they could have their own Christmas celebration without worrying about a slave revolt on the quiet. So they'd just give them lots of alcohol, make sure that they partied themselves out, and then they'd all go to sleep and they would be safe. And so Frederick Douglass refused to have the alcohol on that basis. And it was a challenge to the system. And the slaves themselves said, hey, if you they'll stop giving us. If you don't show gratitude for the alcohol, they'll stop giving us the alcohol. And he was kind of saying, well, that would be a good thing because then you guys would be rebellious. There were a couple of things to note that one of them is the slaves would stay incarcerated effectively for their Christmas alcohol. So they were complicit in their slavery. You say that now, like Kanye West or somebody said it, and they just about tore his head off. But the slaves are complicit in their slavery, especially when it comes to food. Over and over again, you see the pattern that there's almost anything somebody will do for a regular bowl of rice a day. There's an almost visceral terror. So you can keep people infantilized. You can keep whole classes of people down just by controlling their food intake. And you keep them like a dog, literally almost like a pet, because with the threat of not having food for one day, then they will allow you to incarcerate them for life and enslave them and use their labor. So you have this parasitic relationship with a human being, and it's all done by control of the food. And that's why, James C. Scott and Against the Grain, why civilization started with the grain. Because it was with grains are portionable, controllable, and you can warehouse them. So because they could centralize the food and control the food, then that made the slave system. And it applies today. If you have to go down and get food out of a store like Sainsbury's or Vons or Trader Joe's or something like that, is they control the food. And if they control the food, you're a slave. So a lot of the people, why people won't rebel is because they're like, I'll be starving on the street. I won't, I have 1 week's paycheck and I'll be starving on the street. That's why they don't rebel. But if you look at people that really do rebel, say like the Afghans who just did a successful rebellion against American colonialism, the Afghans can do it because they don't shop in Vons, right? They have their own sources of food, and so that's what gives them the luxury to rebel. So the first act of rebellion is to, reject the food from the master and take your own supply of food. It is the fundamental insurrection. And that's why since ancient times, the diggers and the ranters and all these people that tried to get out of the sharecropping system, get out of peonage, and get their own sources of food and cut out the boss, that was the primary rebellion and the primary source of insurrection, which was punished very harshly. So I just want to say that as maybe a closing note to all the hippies that think they can go and do permaculture, saying, well, it's tolerated now because the system's intact and you're rich, and so they indulge you. But when the shit hits the fan, then basically what you're doing is an act of direct insurrection. You might as well go and do eco-sabotage for what it counts against the system that you are not enslaved by the food system. So remember that you will not be left to do your permaculture on your own in your little garden, because it is an act of insurrection. It's just tolerated now because they don't want to show their true face. But as things collapse, they will show their true face. You're not going to be permitted to do permaculture. You can do a victory garden in Britain during World War II, but if you hoarded food or actually had your own little community that was well nourished, everybody was starving, that's enough to get you hung. And those days are certainly going to come back. You're starting to see, well, I wouldn't say that meatflation and stuff that's happening in Europe and America is the start of that. It might be temporary until they get the system hauled out, but it's a taste, to excuse the pun, of what's to come. So it gives you an idea of how it starts. It starts with the cost of food going up and up, and then everybody will cling to the system. Then nutrition goes down and down, and they go for the grains. So give us this day our daily bread. It's basically, that's a slave incantation right there. That's why Christianity is for slaves, because anything that starts off with "give us this day our daily bread" is the epitome of the chains of that food put on you, the food from the master. So it's, if Christianity was really rebellious, it would say, make sure that we can source our daily bread from some other hand than the master.
Yeah,
that would be real insurrection.
I think there's a reason why pimps try to get their whores hooked on narcotics to keep them under control. And with the grains creating these opioids in our brains, and being addictive, it's just the same thing. And I wanted to add also that when you this is the same thing with the same principle behind universal basic income as well. That you do not want to accept that from their hand. Do not take it. And it's also, that they will take the control of the sex and the food, and they'll meter it back to you just as long as you're subservient and give them your labor. So and also your health. So if you give them your health, you are locked into the system as well, right? You can't give up your health care then, because you have diabetes and all these things that there's no way out of the system. The technological system doesn't need healthy people.
It needs dependence. It needs dependence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same reason that the pimp doesn't need a healthy whore, right? It needs a dependent whore, right? And that's what we are.
May I add that you mentioned diabetes there, but when I was a medical student, diabetes type 2, which is the plague of the States and some of the northern countries now, didn't hardly exist. It was called the maturity diabetes. It used to be something that would happen when you'd get older and your body was starting not to process sugar very well. And, you know, it was managed quite well. And suddenly, within 20 years, it exploded. It totally exploded to see people now in their 30s with it. And it's totally linked to the the manufacturing of diabetes, I would call it. It's by the food that has been advised to people and how they've been offered all these grains. And so it is actually what you're saying. Those people are now in a system where they are dependent on the doctor, on their drugs, and the complications that they get from that disease makes them even more dependent on it. And it is completely made. It has nothing to do with genetics. It has nothing to do with anything like that. It's directly dependent on lifestyle, diet, and stuff like that.
But
And
all of it creates growth.
And I've seen it happening in my lifetime. So it's very quick to get a pimp, to get a whore hooked to the narcotic, as you said. It's very, very quick. Fast.
Yeah, all the financiers have become dependent on the healthcare industry that's profiting from that diabetes. So nobody really wants to do anything about it. It's actually the more people that get diabetes, the better it is for the stock market. So everybody's caught out with the system, because in America, your 401k, your retirement is linked to the stock market, and healthcare is a big part of that. So the healthcare and military-industrial complex gets bigger and bigger, and and it profits from the slaves' health going down. But the slaves furiously work to try and put money in their 401k so they can retire. So it's this beautiful, big, vicious cycle that is completely unsustainable, because it's the more people that get diabetes, and more unhealthy people, the more the costs go up, the more it gets misallocated. The wealth of the nation gets misallocated to the healthcare industry and to people that use it for rockets to space. And and so basically they in effect they're eating up the bottom layers of the society, giving them these health problems for profit.
Well, there is a psychological dimension to this too, you see, because I remember reading a few years ago a book by Charles Eisenstein, which is an American speaker who's written some quite good things. He's a bit hippie, but he's got his things. But he wrote about he wrote a book called The Ascent of Humanity that I read years ago. It was a bit like what you're talking about, really. He describes the alien cortex, really, but in his own words. And he addresses lots of myths, and one of them is the myth of scarcity. That actually our system is using to implement in people the idea that they're lacking something. They're lacking something psychologically, they're lacking something in money, they're lacking something in food, the myth of scarcity. And that has been, there's an example of that, and I think I posted a link to an article about that on the comments, is in the post-Holocaust generation of Jewish survivors, and the link to weight problems in their offspring, because those people were so conditioned to famine, to starvation, to scarcity, that they actually propagated that fear of scarcity into the generations after, which sometimes even 2 generations are suffering from obesity because of that. So there's a direct link on that creating and that's what the advertising world does. It's just creating, you need something, you're lacking something. The psychologists are telling you need to fix yourself, you're not enough, and it goes deep into the root of problems of food too. And again, we go back to the idea that you were saying about your prepping exercise. I think this is brilliant. I think this would be a fantastic thing to do. I mean, I've done it myself. I've put myself in situations without even knowing I was doing it. I was doing it instinctively go without things, and realize how much we have, and have gratitude for all the stuff we have, instead of, thinking, oh, I don't have enough in my fridge, or, oh, I should go to the supermarket and fill up my shelves. And, you succumb to this very, very easily, very easily.
Yeah, I just want a word of caution. There might be that obesity after cup generations might be epigenetics. So if you look at the studies from the hunger winter in Holland and stuff, I'll put some of that in the Darwin video that I did about epigenetics. So there is an epigenetic component to
There is probably
starvation and and obesity in grandchildren.
Yeah, but there is a behavioral thing, because I had friends I had a very good friend in medical school whose parents had escaped. One of them had been in a camp. The other one had escaped the ghetto of Warsaw. And you should have seen their tables, and you should have seen their kitchen. You should have seen what they were feeding. When we were starving students, we always used to go to that house because there was enough to feed an army. They were constantly making things, so it might be epigenetic, and definitely it certainly is, but there's a behavioral, there's a mindset that's being transmitted that way too. It's incredible.
I think there's another aspect.
You just reminded me.
Above and beyond the epigenetic as well, which is on your the microbiota inside you. A lot of the diet has been massively affected. Much of our digestion and everything is from these symbiotic relationships that we have with these bacteria, and sanitation has absolutely wiped a lot of them out. So polio, for example, did not exist until sanitation. Really, like it was a disease of sanitation, right? And a lot of our modern diseases, they didn't exist until recently, right? Because of the we have all this we don't have the diversity where we're trying to like regiment our eat the yogurt and get the lactobacillus and say that that's all you need, right? And it's this is Ivan Illich, I believe. So it's I think it's really important to include, just like you said with the farmland, how that's being barren and it's a complete desertification because there are no animals to come back and reconstitute the soil. In a lot of ways, the diets that we might have ate before, maybe our internal microbiota is barren in a similar sense, or monoculture type of thing where we're not transferring either through the space age, we're using formula instead of breast milk, or we're not transferring we're not keeping the culture alive, pardon the pun.
So yeah, though they know that the microbiota are putting out chemicals, they really control us. In a lot of ways, we just like a sack for the microbiota. There are more of them in terms of cell numbers than there are of cells of our body. So there's a good case for saying that, well, they're really in charge. And they found that they secrete all these things like leptin and all these things to control us. So if we control our hunger and control our emotions and give us all sorts of drives to go and get foods that we might not have. So if you start feeding us like slave food, which is just sugar or starch, it probably cultivates a microbiome in our gut on a large scale where people are organism in our gut that probably everybody has in large percentages, and it's the thing that lives mainly off sugar, and it's probably sending a signal saying, go and get a Coke, go and have some white bread, go and have some starch, go and have some sugar, because it needs it. And so if you got a like fecal transplant with someone, say somebody in Papua New Guinea, it would completely alter your mood and your cravings and all sorts of things. But I never really see that discussed or see much scientific research done to it. But if you think in terms of an African plain, Lord Keith mentioned this. It was a very important thing. It's a very important observation that particularly for vegetarians that want to get rid of cows and think it's friendly to cows not to to ungulates not to eat them, is we're supposed to be hunters, as Keith said, and when the places in Africa that are now game farms and are struggling, they used to be absolutely filled with game, in seas of game. So I went to one where they it's kind of denuded and they're kind of hanging on with tourism and stuff. And they showed photographs of the same valley, which is now a kind of measly, not so healthy looking place. They showed it in the 1920s, where people, the people passing through, trekking through on foot, they had to make camp and wait for these seas of herds of impala to pass through, and it took 3 or 4 days for them to go through. So they literally just, as far as the eye can see, these herds going through these landscapes. Now, you think, how can the grass feed that amount of animals? And the way to see it is what Keith was saying is, and Alan Savory and stuff, and has been trying to propagate this idea, is that there's the same on the African plains and all these things. They were densely populated with vertebrates, with herbivores. And the way to think of it is that really the grass and the plains and the prairies, that's only half the system. That's only half the organism that you're looking at. The other half is in the stomachs of the animals. So the prairie is literally living half, literally half by tonnage, by weight, in the gut of all these animals, and half on what you see. So by taking the animals off, we've kind of stripped half the organs out of this this biosphere, or this whole ecological network. We've just like stripped 50% of the organs out of it. And so I think it's important too to see us, though we kind of not supposed to have such vast numbers. It's important to see us and seeing that a lot of the biosphere exists in our biome, and we just carrying it around, and in a lot of ways it's directing us. So the point I was trying to make is that these things are not as simple as people make out in terms of diet. We think in terms of us being in charge and our diet and stuff, and I think we should start thinking in terms of, well, a lot of what we are is microbiome, and you should start thinking of it being in charge, and kind of at the very most thinking about gardening your microbiome, rather than in fact feeding yourself, because you have a garden inside you. So you're farming the system. You're not feeding yourself. You're feeding all these things that break down the stuff that then you get. So we are an ecosystem. We're not feeding ourselves. We're feeding the microbes that then feed us, and we forget that.
And this is going back to exactly what you were saying this morning about stasis, about balance, about equilibrium. And when we start to intervene, you were telling the example about the geoengineering this morning, but we're going to the same thing there. We're touching the same thing. We live in symbiosis with viruses and bacteria and fungi that are there, that are part of us. There's more, as you said, more of them than we have cells in our body. So the balance is now. I see Bob has put a link to the microbiome by an anthropologist. That would be very interesting to read. Thank you, because that imbalance is obvious in the epidemic of mental health problems, because we all know that serotonin is made in the gut, and that 90% of the serotonin is made in the gut, and it's evident that you don't need to read a lot of research to understand the link between the epidemic of mental health problems and eating disorders and the state of our microbiome. There's no miracle about that. It's just, again, what we were saying at the beginning, to go back to listen to your body, go back to listen to what all these little friends that you have inside are telling you to do, and not listen to the friends outside or the enemies outside on the media. And you know, it's knowing yourself again. You're back to that again, always. You know?
So the problem with that is that we are not the natural human. We've been domesticated. We are the, you know, the poodle that used to be the wolf, right? So we have a lot of artificial health issues that normally, you know, we wouldn't necessarily have if we were, you know, 30,000 years ago, right? And 30,000 years ago, we would expect that we would have, you know, a tennis ball sized amount of extra brain capacity, which definitely has a lot to do with the diet, considering how calorific or calorie hungry the brain is. It's the most calorific or calorie hungry tissue in the body, and you know, if it is that that expensive of tissue, then it must have had some purpose. Otherwise, it would have gone out the window as well. So trying to get in touch with my body is like, it's disturbing to me, because I am trying to get in touch with what is missing in my head from that tennis ball sometimes, you know, and
yeah, but I mean, but at the very least, it's good to not think in terms of how we culturally do that. You know, your body's broken. So if you, for example, get depressed, our way of thinking in the Western world is that, oh well, you know, you're broken, and depression might be your microbiome saying, hey, I can't take this diet anymore, and you know, it would be better if you hibernated in bed and anything to stop you eating this crap. And so, you know, a microbiome might be telling you something, and that you interpret as, this is terribly unhealthy depressive behavior, or it's ADD, or and stuff. And I think it's a very low bar to say, you know, at the very least, don't assume that we're always broken when, you know, you don't aspire to the standards of a slave. So
yeah, when I was saying the body,
you can't get back to the wilds, but it helps to be not to beat yourself up.
When I was saying the body, Ryan, I meant maybe allowing the parts of the brain that have maybe not suffered as much in the evolution of the civilized human to go. You see, those parts that are deeply in contact with the microbiome, the limbic system, the hypothalamus, the fish, the reptilian. I mean, mostly the fish brain, actually, for what's concerning food, and also some emotions and things like that, and hunger, because those parts I don't think have really reduced. They just that the circuitry is probably not really working very well, and is suppressed by many other structures. I mean, I'm not a specialist in neuroscience, but I kind of figure out a bit like how it's working, and I think that's pretty good. We have a pretty good intact. We're much better than we think, you know. But we just stop going down there at all, and it's difficult.
It's worth also remembering that. It's also worth remembering that don't get too much of a static view of our architecture, because of what we're talking about with AI is that it must be self-organizing. So the brain is very plastic, and the only good explanation for how there's so much reuse of areas that haven't been used is you assume that, you know, if you ask what happened to that tennis ball of gray matter, some of it's been given over to the alien cortex, but it's probably things that are involved with smell and with sensors and stuff have been repurposed. So there might be some actual physical deficits like a smaller brain in general. But in terms of the plasticity of these things, if our brain is self-organizing, then they could potentially self-organize into something that is, not exactly our wild state, but at least it's appropriate for the environment that we're in now, or we're going to be in.
Yeah, I think I like this idea of having, folding some of these actions into an arc. I like the idea of incorporating fasting or a fast of various kinds. So it could be like a social media fast, or a don't use technology from after 1950 fast, or try to have a a communicate with people in person fast, things like that, and put it on a oh, I almost said put it on a schedule, on a Chronos cadence. Yeah, but I think synchronize with other people is a great thing to do.
Yeah, it could be organic. You could just go from various kind of dares or challenges. It doesn't all have to be giving up stuff. It can actually be doing stuff as well. So it doesn't all have to be like giving up stuff for Lent.
Yeah.
It can also be things like switching off your fridge. Just trying that out. Try to live without water from a faucet or from a bottle or something like that.
The other idea that comes out of this is, what if we were to monetize the ARG a little bit with some courses in scavenging, or in how to do blacksmithing or things like that.
That's what I wanted to do. Yeah, that was all in the plan. So the plan was to monetize it with Geodos. It had an internal currency, and it could be done. It is being done by people like doing Workaway and things like that. There are networks that are exploring all of that. But yeah, I would love to do it as part of our subculture culture. Yeah, it's I thought we were all launched, with the ARG and stuff, with Faulty and all of them. Apparently, all seem to be on board with it, but then they all kind of dived into all these, sidetracked into all this, I don't know, stuff I don't believe in. Fairy tales, as far as I can see.
Well, we could do courses without the ARG, and like they could be standalone and be folded in later if we don't need those folks to get that started. I mean.
Yeah, but the aim of the ARG was to end up on the idea of adaptation, of deep adaptation. We wanted to come gradually to that through a kind of transformational. So we'd have to rethink that if you wanted to do it that way, unless you wanted to do some kind of independent skill sharing.
What we were saying earlier in the day was that that this time is a time for self-improvement and investing in the future actions that we could do. So I was thinking about, we can work on the logos, we can do that kind of thing. But also, if we create some collateral that starts creating some passive income that can help the ARG be funded, it can help it grow that way as well. So putting some of those things in place that are going to be necessary skill sets for collapse, I think is a it would be an interesting thing to provide to people who are looking to skill up, because I know that I wouldn't be able to survive if collapse happened, because I don't have those skills yet, and I'd love to learn.
You
Well,
wouldn't
one
be able
thing I would
to, what
offer.
did you say? I didn't hear what you said, Ryan. You wouldn't be able to what?
Well, you know what like that garden in a box kit thing. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to survive if collapse happened now, because I don't have the knowledge to be able to make it all fit together and to make it through the years and the winters and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's practice. You can't. I mean, you can't get that out of a book, and you can't get that out of a. You have to get your hands dirty. You see,
I
it's very difficult. I remember we tried, Ryan, to exchange at one stage about that, and I think we had that conversation about that. It's really even in terms of other skills, carpentry, health. You know, it's a hands-on thing. How to make a bandage, or how to find the right routes on a roadside. You need to be doing it a lot. You need to exercise your eyes, your smell,
Yeah,
your
but I don't want to
hearing.
be doing it with trial and error. I want some
Yeah,
expertise to be handed down in some way, because there are people who have that knowledge, and if I start from scratch, then that's the same as if it collapsed today. Like, trial and error isn't going to get me there. I need some wisdom.
So one of the things I would offer is anybody listening on this call is I would like to offer my boat and train people on sailing, get people, you know, because to me, if you like the sea and you don't mind dying at sea, you're not scared of drowning or something. You don't have horrors of, you know, that kind of nature. I think my primary thing is I would recommend to anybody is the sea. Is go to sea. Sailing is is plan A for survival. It's you know, right back to Waterworld and Kevin Costner. It's like you if you have a want to be a survivalist is first get a boat. And so yeah, the potential for sailing and building up a sailing community of doomers is huge. We explored some of the things about guerrilla gardening in marine environments, sailors' gardens, which are basically mussel beds and floating rafts, and horticultural rafts and floating greenhouses and all that stuff. So there's a big tradition in sailing with all of this. The original sailors in the 60s, particularly the French ones, the famous guys, and all the way back going to Joshua Slocum and stuff at the turn of the century, there's this long thread of collapse and survival and people going to sea. So just a couple of weeks ago, I met James Warren, who invented the catamaran in its modern form. You got it from the Polynesians, but you know, I got a catamaran, and he designed the first modern catamaran in the 50s, and then all these catamarans. So I had to thank him for inventing my boat. He's 94 now, old guy, but he met him on his boat and a sister ship, which are wooden, 60-foot, huge catamarans. And the sister ship was this German guy who built it based on James Warren's design, and he has a whole community that are all going around the world. They pretty much doomers. They're not as doomer as we are, but the idea of you know, breaking away, doing everything out of wood, getting away from tech, just nibbling a little bit at tech, just on the fringes, but not doing what most people who go to sea is get heavily into electronics and stuff, is try and get away from that. But there are communities, sailing communities, that are thinking this way. And so I would love to build up a doomer community and train people. And there are all these stories of people I know, friends and stuff, that have got a yacht for $1 and done it up, and some of the people that we had this kind of party, and there's some of the people in these things, they were doing that. They were building up their boats, and so they're getting training from, this 94-year-old. He's a cult guru. He's a cult guru, basically, of a sea cult. And it's kind of hippie sea cult. It's all back to the sea and so all of that kind of thing. And I must say, I think that appeals to me a lot. I would love to get a flotilla of boats together. People think the same way. I think there's huge potential.
Yeah.
So anyway, anybody listening, I'll offer my boat to train you to
I love the
sail.
sea. The sea is great. I used to do. I haven't done so much recently, but the last 4 or 5 years, I was heavily into sea kayaking, and there is something magical about the sea. And I have done a little bit of sailing, and I did enjoy it. There is something quite incredible about being on a boat under the power of wind, under the power of sail. I did it a little bit in the Channel Islands, and I heard a story from a friend of a friend about they visited the Scilly Isles off of Cornwall, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, there's loads of sea gypsies there. People who could barely rub 2 pennies together, like really poor people, but they you reckon they were living pretty much hand to mouth, and a bit like your ideal of a sort of bunch of sea pirates, sea
I
gypsies."
think we'll get to that. Yeah, there is a make a boat called Sea Gypsy, and I've seen more than one boat called Sea Gypsy. Yeah, that's the general idea, is that I think that a community like that would be resilient, and the fact that you're mobile means that you see, if you, Ryan, talking about getting education on, say, plants and local environment, it's all very, very local. So you've it doesn't matter if you Bear Grylls or something. If you're in the wrong environment, you won't do very well. So you've got to say, around Greece, you can explore the natural edible plants and stuff on the islands, but it's all different on the Ionian or the Aegean or whatever. And so, yeah, you just build up knowledge and stuff. But, in terms of breaking away, I can give sailing, 2 thumbs up.
Well,
if you have that temperament, it's not for everybody.
If I can echo the offer of Hugh, because I'm a more land-based person, even though I live near the sea, but I'm tied up a bit to my land for many reasons, and I've done the same thing with getting people, usually from cities, through organizations like Workaway, LPEX, Couchsurfer, Woofer, who have come to do to stay with me on exchange of food and bed. They help me out and sometimes learn stuff. So I extend the same invitation to anybody who would be. I've got plenty of time and the will to show you. But of course, I live in a particular ecosystem and a particular environment, so it wouldn't be adapted to people who are living in certain type of countries. So, but I mean, if some people are interested, same goes for me.
Well, here's the thing, that increasingly it's becoming possible to become a digital nomad, and after COVID, and soon you'll be able to live in the metaverse. So once the metaverse is here, you can be anywhere. So it's very possible to. It's even worth writing a book or something about it. Because everybody's thinking in terms of prepping and stuff, but I think it's quite practical to start gently weaning yourself off tech civilization. And the tech civilization itself is offering a lot of ways to do it. So you can work remotely from a boat, carry on earning money, while you live afloat, and you still, you know, have one eye on prepping. So you basically ease gently, set the industrial civilization adrift, and move, you know, quietly tiptoe towards the door. is is my is my is my recommendation, because you can do that and you can still do activism, you can still earn money, and you can still start prepping. Because the thing is, one of the downsides of prepping is nobody knows when the shit hits the fan. I mean, you can know that it's going to hit the fan, but you don't know. 10 years, 20 years, um, you know, they might start geoengineering. You might be 50 years of this hellish dystopia. And so all of these things is, I don't know, I think going to sea was one of the best things I ever did. Yeah. So anyway, I just want to put that out to you, that when people start talking about prepping strategies and stuff, I say, like, well, I think we should start, you know. Practically speaking, we have one of the many, many communities out there that is starting to break away. And I certainly say that you in terms of living close to nature and just adventure and living a fantastic life, is like, it's unbeatable, the life I lead on the boat. So anyway,
Is there
I just
any
want to put that out there.
Doomer library somewhere that would have a bunch of these skills wrapped up? I mean, I imagine old-timey shipwright books exist, where pre-electronics and stuff, like how to make a boat. But you know, what it'd be interesting to curate a selection of that could go into a Doomer library, that we could, you know, we're all geographically spread about, so we might want to take advantage of some of the electronic forms that we still have available, but maybe we'll print them out at some point. But
there's tons of resources. I mean, yeah, you could definitely go. Why don't you could probably crew on a boat. Like, no, I don't know where you are, but there's tons of people that are offering crewing. Maybe it's a bit different now because of COVID, but surely Hugh knows about that.
it's a bit cold here in Shanghai.
Lots of people that want crew. Yeah, no, there's you see, there's a huge sailing community, but it all has different flavors. So you get a large number of people are retired people that they're retired to sea. There's younger groups that are doing the hippie thing, being sea gypsies and seasteading. They're all different flavors of people, but in general, you get one or two guys that are like serious doomers. But I like the idea of starting a hardcore doomer community. You know, that's with the expectation that this civilization is going down and prepping. So I know people that are kind of loosely in that thing. Some of them have kids and stuff, but for the most part, I don't know any hardcore community. Certainly here on Greece, where people are thinking, you know, they've gone to sea as a prepping strategy, kind of like Dmitry Orlov or me. But I would love to get that together, because there's so many people in the States and that are leaving the city and prepping. And I think they're probably making a mistake. They're probably going up a blind alley.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I guess I was just thinking, if you just wanted to get your toes wet and just see what it's like to go on a boat, or I don't know, do some woofing, depending where you are. But yeah, it's a really nice idea for sure.
It's in my near-term
Yeah.
plans.
Well, good. Well, okay, lots to think about there. But yeah, okay. I guess that should be it because we have gone on. Wow. Okay, so let's pause a moment then and then just round this off. All right. All right. So let's fall still. Boom. Paramatman in the mark. Okay then. Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Sorry
everyone.
about the cop. Sorry that didn't work out. I thought the cop was going to save the planet and then it didn't. Oh well, damn.
Oh, too bad.
Well, top in our
well.
head always appeared, huh?
Maybe next year. Yeah. Maybe next year. Yeah. All right. Well,
So thank